Greetings all over the world, wherever you are. In this world, we were taught that there are 5 continents, and of those 5 continents, Africa is one of the biggest. And today, we know that there are 54 countries in Africa, and these 54 countries are not united, although there is some unity through African Union. One begins to wonder whether the African Union is serving any purpose. 54 countries coming together and they still fail to organize themselves into one unit or authority to emphasize or create means for their people to develop their continent. Africa has got all the resources you need. The whole world has been built by resources from Africa. And there's still more resources still available. When there was talk of climate change, African leaders were also invited to the meeting to discuss the African issue or part, or for them to share their belief as well, or to have their own contribution about the climate change. But it appears they did not have enough time to do anything after the meeting, because after the meeting, already some European countries and Americans were already developing or manufacturing electric cars, but the Africans did not have anything or a share of that market. Yet the resources that are used to make those cars actually are within their own territory. They failed to get a grip on the use of the resources so that at least in the development of an electric car, they get a share of production to create that environment that is desired by the collective thinking. They could have asked to produce at least batteries from Africa, from the lithium that they have. Batteries could have started to be produced from Africa for the very electric cars that are produced from Europe. It would have been a fairer way of doing things to have, say, okay, the Africans will produce batteries and maybe wheels, tires and things like that, and the engines and other parts are done on the European side. What Africans don't realize is that 54 countries, or is it 55, have failed to come up with just making a decision to create one single passport for their subjects and one currency, and link the borders. They don't have to destroy the borders, they can maintain borders. Europe is run with borders, but they are under the European Union. It doesn't change anything. You just have to have a federal government. At the African Union, if it's organized properly, the African Union can produce a federal government which oversees all the other countries. But the other countries can be run individually, but with the main rules or laws coming from the federal government. They could even control all the wars that are occurring or taking place in Africa and bring sanity to the continent. So Africa can only survive if there is a rethinking to this. 55 countries must come together. They don't have to destroy their borders. They can still retain their borders. We've seen that the borders do not do anything, but if you have a passport, they allow movement of people from one country to another. That is just a means of ensuring that we've got some form of identity, but we have one common passport. In each country can have their own IDs. In the USA, one comes from California, goes to Florida or Georgia, but those are states, and there's a governor running that state in each one of them. These states, there are 50 of them, and they make up what we call the United States. So if you look at Africa with 55, it looks they are slightly more than the United States. And if well organized, Africa can actually do better than the United States. Each country can only contribute to the economy by making sure that they produce what they have in their own country towards the federal government's use to create a market that can compete with the world markets, the European market. Brexit was created or came about with very difficult decisions, but it came so fast that some people are now regretting that they did that, breaking away from other Europeans. The UK broke away from other Europeans because obviously they thought that because they've got the Commonwealth, which is quite a big market as well, and they had more control of the markets, but they did not realize the common thing of coming together, the minds sitting there and making decisions. You need each other or one another, depending on whatever situation. And talking of languages, Africans think that speaking the same language is the only form of showing unity. That is not true. Yes, we can have one common African language to make sure that communication is easier, but it does not necessarily mean that it's difficult to communicate without a single common language. In Europe, the French speak French and they stick to their languages. The Portuguese speak their own. So do the Danes and the Dutch. They all have their own languages, but they stick or became or stay under the umbrella of the European Union. They all have one passport. The UK broke away to retain their own standards. Even when they were in the European Union, they still retained their currency, the pound, when everybody else was using the euro. I think it was understood because they had the power, they had the economic power, strength, which made sure that the pound stayed economically stronger than all the other currencies. It was because of the markets. Obviously, the Commonwealth is so strong a community that it is stronger than anything else in the world, and the British understood that. This is why they thought that if they come out of the European Union, because there's other rules or laws coming from the central government, which they did not really like, that did not all go well with the British. So they thought that if they came out of it, they would have more freedom. But now they realize that their freedom from the unity of Europeans can weaken their strength, which they had always had. If they stayed within the European Union, they would have a stronger voice within the European Union, and they retain their power because they were still allowed to use their pound sterling. There's no reason why they had to move. So this idea by others that the British came or broke away from the European Union or the Brexit, it was a bad idea. I don't think it is, well, that's how I think, but I think most people, I've had some conversations here on radio and other people discussing that it really appears to have been a big mistake to leave the European Union. And some are suggesting rejoining the European Union. And I think if they do that, they will find that they get stronger as a European community than Africans, because Africans are failing to just organize themselves into a union, which they already have, but are not integrating the nitty-gritties. They're failing to pinpoint the actual requirements of unity to come together. It's not breaking the borders. It is coming together and thinking together and putting resources together to call it a federal government. The Union of Africa was a good idea by Kwame Nkrumah. It was said long time, and he was right. But those who are against it are the ones who have actually made Africa fail, because that has caused all the failure to industrialize Africa. If they had come together, they could have produced a better market, better currency, better passport, and the strength to industrialize Africa. Africa needs an industrial revolution. That's it. If you've got other thoughts, we can come and discuss. But this is what I think should be done. Africa, come together. And the young leaders can see it now. Events in Africa now tell that the young Africans have realized this is the truth. They need to come together. But the elders still have their beliefs in their head that they need to oversee the young ones. In African terms, it is always known that an elder would not listen to a young person. If you go anywhere in Africa, no elder is called by their first name. You go anywhere in Africa, no elder is called by their first name unless they are just another nobody walking about. Think about it. And it's open for discussion. I may be wrong, but this is how I think. This is what I think. Africa can come together, just like Europe is together. Of course, with this Brexit disappointment, they can still amend that. But Africa has a bigger problem. The only problem is just putting things together for the Union, the African Union, to be more practically involved in all African business than now. I think now certain individuals are using it for their own benefit. The rest are just being associated with it by the skin of the color of their skin, without putting any much effort into the intricacies of making it effective. Africa, 55 countries, they've got to do something. And all Africans are waiting to see what Africans can do. And the time to do that is now. There's been a lot of talking, and after all this talking, there's still a lot more to be done. I'm sure Lumumba from Kenya has done his best to try and educate people There's Vusi from South Africa. He's also said things that really show that the Africans have got a purpose to come together. Those two African speakers are respectable because they say the truth, but their audience fails to put that into action. All these speeches put together can amount to something if action is brought forth. Thank you for watching. I'm Baba Kobi.